Warning: the following video pertains to material that is not suitable for younger audiences. Although nothing visually explicit from the original material will be shown on screen to avoid potential censorship issues, please exercise appropriate discretion when proceeding with either this video or the original content in question. Thank you. Chiaki J. Konaka is one of anime's most unusual writers, having worked in a wide variety of styles, both dramatic and comedic. While he has done script work for anime such as Princess Tutu, Razafon, and Devilman Lady, one would most likely recognize him for his series composition contributions on shows such as Serial Experiments Lain, Technolize, Malice Doll, and Digimon Tamers, among others. For these four properties especially, one of the recurring themes that one can parse out is the relationship between humanity and machines, or technology, including how they both intersect and influence the other. The division between machine versus man, where one ends and the other begins, what's left over individually or societally when one takes over, and the like, are all fair game to Konaka. While the writing for these shows, as well as other aspects such as their visual presentations, can sometimes make them a hard sell to people who are not into this particular brand of brain-bending science fiction, there's no denying that these are subjects that Konaka is invested in and quite taken with. As humanity moves into the future, several of the ideas that he probes in the course of these properties can read as grimly prophetic. There's often an alienating affect that leaves the viewer in the cold, left alone to parse how they see themselves in relation to the contemplated ideas. And did you also know that he wrote the scripts for a softcore OVA adaptation? Maybe a little more context is needed here. Futari Ecchi, or The Perverted 2, is a 1996 comedy ero manga created by Katsuaki, with over 800 chapters written and is still ongoing. The story, told largely in vignette with loose continuity between the chapters, concerns an arranged marriage newlywed couple in their mid-20s, Makoto and Yura. All seems to be right with the world, and the two are about to embark into their magical land of love and happily ever after, until the twist is revealed that both of them are virgins on their wedding night and really don't know the first thing about sex. The chapters progress into the two of them gradually learning not only how sex is supposed to work, but also how to enjoy it and become a better sexual partner for the other. As the manga continued, it eventually started to explore the sexual lives of its other characters, and how they could potentially intersect with Makoto and Yura through either family interference or trying to dispense what they think is sexual wisdom to, shall we say, questionable success. The manga's unusual claim to fame, though, is not in its depictions of sex itself, which never really cross into lewd depictions of below-the-belt genitalia, but rather with the wide breadth of sexual topics that it concerns itself with. Complete with charts and statistical information, which is, shockingly enough, sourced and cited, Futari Ecchi fashions itself as a how-to guide for sex and relationships for people who know nothing about them, sometimes even coming with instructions. To give an idea of just what kinds of things the manga will not be afraid to talk about, one chapter involves one boyfriend not being able to perform at a love hotel because of pain he feels from phimosis, Makoto constantly suffering from premature ejaculation, or men sadly taking advantage of a female character's idealized version of sex to make sleeping with her easier. Another running thread is that, despite fashioning herself before as not really being someone with a sex drive, Yura accepts that it's a part of who she is. Simply put, the series tries to encompass every aspect of sexuality and sexual behavior it can get its hands on. It's worth mentioning that parts of the manga have aged like rotten milk, such as Yura supposedly being the prime example of a stay-at-home wife who will almost always accept Makoto's sexual advances, Makoto being a constant horn dog, where is that familiar, or the manga being more or less completely centered on heteronormativity. Regardless, given the sheer length of the manga, it makes sense that any adaptation of this story that wasn't going to go for the long haul would instead take a few select chapters and trim them into a more slimly packaged product. And thus we have the Futari Ecchi OVA, having released its 4 episodes from 2002 to 2004, with its adapted material handled writing-wise by Chiaki J. Konaka, and made at Studio Chaos Project. The OVA, directed by Moriyama Yuji, who got his start as an animator for the 1981 adaptation of Urusei Yatsura, truncates the earliest difficulties of Makoto and Yura's relationship. With this directorial decision made, Konaka emphasizes certain things like the wholesome feelings that exist between the two lovers, and de-emphasizes the idea that it takes a very long time for them to gradually figure out their own sexual chemistry. By the end of the OVA's second episode, both Makoto and Yura have already taken giant leaps forward in their nighttime activities, and it ends more with optimism through action rather than simply saying they'll get better in time. So, here's a question. How the heck does Konaka fit into this? If you expect any of the brain-bending science fiction that one would expect from some of the more famous works, you'll be coming up empty this time around, especially considering just how grounded in the supposed present-day, present-time this setting is. If the material is so unsuited to Konaka's usual style and approach to thematic material, what could possibly be in Futari Ecchi that would have made either Chaos Project or Moriyama seek out Konaka as the scriptwriter in the first place? Where's the cosmic psychological horror or Lovecraft-esque references or imagery incorporation? The question of Konaka's involvement actually does have an answer, although it's not so clear at first sight. Despite the prevalence of its ecchi comedy and lessons that the characters try to grasp, Futari Ecchi can be understood as a story of two bumbling people attempting to connect in a way that is expected of them as spouses. But it's important to stress that physically having sex is only part of the overall whole. In the case of Futari Ecchi, the idea of connecting implies, like some of Konaka's other script work, both the physical and metaphysical level. In this case, Makoto and Yura physically join in what is supposed to be the most intimate way that two people can experience, which is framed as one of the ways in which they are able to more resolutely connect emotionally. Physical connection is a genuine obstacle that they must seek to overcome in their own ways, both individually when it comes to understanding their own sexual problems and behaviors, and together as a couple for when they're trying to navigate this new unfamiliar territory together. In bridging one particular gap, they're able to bridge the other gap together hand in hand, or penis and vagina if you prefer to think of it that way. Gazed through this particular lens of connection, one can see the, albeit tenuous, similarities between Futari Ecchi and Konaka's other scripts. Joining the body together with either an abstract entity or another physical entity altogether is something he has dabbled in many times. Serial Experiments Lane dared to ask what happens when consciousness, if not also physical bodies, cross the border between the real world and the cybernetic world, or the Wired as it was called in that series. Digimon Tamers took the concept of Digivolution and had masters merging with their Digimon when they reached the Mega level, a kind of state that implies absolute trust between the two. Technolize dealt with artificial augmentation of the human body and how humanity had more or less reached a point of pure decline as constant fighting between various factions and the overall population losing the collective will to live led humanity to its death knell. Now, of course, Futari Ecchi is inherently structured as a comedy, so Konaka's place for probing horror and implication isn't anywhere close to being as investigative or disquieting as it is for some of his other work. Yet, it's also important to note that even when it's trying to be funny, Futari Ecchi is dealing with very real problems that couples may have in their own sexual lives. Whether it be an actual problem physically that makes sex not nearly as enjoyable as it's meant to be, or being woefully under-equipped when it comes to knowing about sex in general, the series is careful to balance when the comedy should arise versus when it shouldn't. Even at times where something is framed as funny when the characters are having sex, there is always a point afterwards where there's contemplation about what's going wrong. In that sense, Futari Ecchi is quite sincere in what it's trying to do. And that underlying sincerity is what, I think, may have been the ultimate attractor for Konaka. Konaka has so often dealt with some of the most brain-twisting or spiritually contorting material that anime-manga has come to know, especially at the turn of the century. In the midst of all of that, though, there was always the sense that, regardless of whether one liked the affect or tone that was adopted, Konaka was not just writing these scripts or exploring these ideas just because. He sought to explore them as thoroughly as he could with all that he surveyed. Thought about in this way, it was perhaps the perfect marriage, a manga that sought to try and fully explore human sexuality for people who don't know much about it, with an adaptation script handled by someone known for exploring the totality of his subjects. It's true that Futari Ecchi is comparatively normal for Konaka, but the struggles of its main characters repeat a recurring thread that characterizes his mature work. In lieu of cyberpunk or dystopic nightmares that bring existential dread to the fore, at its core are two people, bound together in union, connecting in the best ways they can despite the hang-ups they both experience. Even if the OVA can get a little overly saccharine with the love between Makoto and Yura, it's the most vanilla take on the original source manga pertaining to those two. By opting instead for a smaller scale story, some of Konaka's penchant for completeness is sacrificed, but what remains is, frankly, a kinder indulgence in anime's more risque genres. There is, of course, one other more practical reason why Konaka took the script job. He needed some money. The guy's gotta eat, you know. This has been ZNote of ZNoteTaku. Happy viewing, everyone.